Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. It may seem like we know Hagrid perfectly well, the kind-hearted keeper of keys and gamekeeper at Hogwarts, the one Harry, Ron and Hermione visited so often. But this giant has far more layers than it might appear at first glance. You're probably familiar with the basics: his pink umbrella, his love for magical creatures, and his habit of seeing the best in even the most questionable people. But in this story, I'll share details about Hagrid's life that you may not know. Enjoy the video. Number 1. He was in the First Order of the Phoenix. Hagrid was more than just the keeper of keys and caretaker of animals. Dumbledore trusted him so deeply that he made him a member of the very First Order of the Phoenix, the secret group formed to fight Voldemort. In the film Order of the Phoenix, you can even spot a photograph where Hagrid stands alongside the other members. And it was Hagrid whom Dumbledore entrusted with one of the most important tasks of all: retrieving baby Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow and delivering him safely to the Dursleys. Though Hagrid wasn't the most powerful wizard, his loyalty and reliability made him irreplaceable. Number 2. J.K. Rowling's plans. In an interview included with the Blu-ray edition of the final film, Daniel Radcliffe shared an intriguing detail. Rowling had decided from the very beginning that it would be Hagrid who carried Harry out of the Forbidden Forest after his confrontation with Voldemort. According to Rowling, this was meant to be symbolic. The half-giant who brought Harry into the wizarding world at the very start would also be the one to carry him at the story's climax. This narrative choice gave Hagrid a kind of plot immunity. While Rowling had considered killing him off during the series, she never followed through. Number 3. A 16-inch flexible wand. As a half-giant, Hagrid had a wand to match, a massive 16-inch wand made of oak. It was flexible and perfectly suited to him, since oak is associated with a deep connection to the magic of nature. Unfortunately, after he was expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, his wand was broken. But Hagrid found a way to keep a part of it, hiding the fragments inside his famous pink umbrella. And though he was officially banned from magic, we all know that his umbrella often accidentally produced spells. Number 4. He was a Gryffindor. When it comes to sorting, Hagrid was clearly no fit for Slytherin. Ambition and cunning were foreign to him. He wasn't a Ravenclaw either, since cleverness wasn't his strongest trait. That left Hufflepuff and Gryffindor. The half-giant could have fit well into either, but the sorting hat ultimately placed him in Gryffindor. This explains why Hagrid always had a special fondness for students of that house. Number 5. He couldn't cast a patronus. Surprisingly, despite his deep love for magical creatures, Hagrid was unable to produce a patronus. J.K. Rowling herself confirmed that he never mastered the spell. The reason is simple: a patronus is an extremely advanced charm, and only a minority of wizards can cast one. Having been expelled and left without a full education, Hagrid simply never had the chance to learn it. Still, this takes nothing away from his worth. He proved his strength and loyalty in other ways. Number 6. The character was inspired by a real biker. Robbie Coltrane, who portrayed Hagrid in the films, revealed that Rowling didn't create the character entirely from imagination. According to her, she once met a massive biker who spoke passionately about his petunias. That contrast, a fearsome appearance hiding a gentle heart, became the core of Hagrid's character, a giant who frightened with his looks but turned out to be kind and caring. Number 7. Hagrid was allergic to cats. And finally, a fact that always brings a smile. Despite his love for all kinds of creatures, Hagrid had a weakness. He couldn't stand cats. In Philosopher's Stone, he openly told Harry that he disliked them because they made him sneeze. That's part of the reason he gave the boy Hedwig, the snowy owl. Rowling later confirmed it. Fluffy felines were the one type of animal Hagrid was unlikely to ever befriend. Number 8. His name has biblical and dialect roots. The name Rubeus carries weight. From the Latin rubeus, meaning red, it ties Hagrid to the earth and to passion. Rowling often used names as subtle symbols, and here the choice is deliberate. Hagrid is a man of soil and stone, happiest in the forest, closest to creatures that others fear. His red nature burns not in anger but in heart, a fiery loyalty that drives him to defend Harry and risk his life without hesitation. When he storms into the Dursleys' hut on the rock and thunders, "Harry, you're a wizard," that same earthy strength pours through his words. The surname tells a different story. In Old English dialects, Hagrid meant a night of restless sleep, often from worry or drink. Rowling admitted this fit the man perfectly. Hagrid's life was marked by hardship, losing his parents young, being expelled, carrying the pain of rejection. His fondness for a bottle of mead or a swig of fire whiskey after heartbreak speaks to that weight. In Goblet of Fire, when Rita Skeeter exposes his giant blood, Hagrid retreats ashamed and broken. The name itself whispers his truth, both the warmth of the earth and the heaviness of sorrow. Number 9. He almost got married. In Goblet of Fire, Hagrid's heart was captured by Madame Maxime, the elegant headmistress of Beauxbatons. Their connection seemed natural. Both were half-giants, both carried the weight of their heritage in a world that often judged them. Rowling paints their courtship with humour and tenderness, from their awkward hand-holding to their moonlit strolls around the castle grounds. When Hagrid nervously offered, "D'ye like me dress robes, Madame Maxime?" Readers glimpsed a side of him rarely shown, shy, hopeful, almost boyish. But the romance faltered. During Rita Skeeter's cruel articles, Maxime denied being part giant, insisting indignantly, "I am big-boned." Hagrid, by contrast, refused to be ashamed of who he was. His pride in his bloodline clashed with her denial, and the silence between them grew. Their bond, once warm, was tested by the very identity that should have united them. Rowling used this conflict to show the sting of prejudice not only from others but from within. Even so, affection lingered. In Order of the Phoenix, Maxime travels with Hagrid to seek out the giants, a dangerous mission that proves her loyalty. They survive together, fight together, and part with mutual respect. Though marriage never came, the romance revealed Hagrid's vulnerability. For once, the towering gamekeeper was not just a guardian or protector, but a man who could love deeply and suffer for it. Number 10. He had a giant half-brother. When Hagrid returned from his mission in Order of the Phoenix, he did not come back alone. Hidden deep in the forbidden forest was Grawp, his half-brother. At 16 feet tall and barely able to speak, Grawp was a giant in every sense, but to Hagrid he was family. "I couldn't just leave him," Hagrid told Harry, Ron, and Hermione, his voice firm despite the bruises across his face. Most saw a dangerous creature. Hagrid saw a brother who needed care. The scenes between them were clumsy, even heartbreaking. Hagrid tried to teach Grawp words, repeating "Hermy" as he pointed at Hermione, desperate to prove that his brother could learn. The giant roared and pulled at trees, frightening anyone who came close. Yet Hagrid kept visiting, bringing food, speaking to him, treating him as someone worth saving. That persistence was more than stubbornness. It was Hagrid's belief that kindness could reach even the most unlikely heart. And in the end, Grawp did change. During the battle at Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows, the giant fought on the side of the school, clashing with other giants who followed Voldemort. It was a moment that proved Hagrid right. The brother everyone feared became a defender. Rowling used Grawp to show that Hagrid's compassion was not naive. It was strength, the kind of strength that could turn even a giant into an ally. Number 11, his heart belonged to dragons. Hagrid's love for dragons burned brighter than for any other creature. In Philosopher's Stone, his dream comes alive when he wins a dragon egg in a shady game of cards. He huddles over the fire in his hut, speaking to the egg as if it were a child. "I always wanted a dragon," he whispers to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, his eyes glowing with excitement. When the egg cracks open and a scaly snout appears, Hagrid beams as though witnessing a miracle. That dragon, first named Norbert, quickly proved why dragons are considered among the most dangerous beasts in the wizarding world. Within days, Norbert was biting, spitting fire, and nearly burning a hole through Hagrid's wooden hut. Ron Weasley even ended up in the hospital wing with a badly infected bite. But none of this shook Hagrid's devotion. He treated the creature like a proud parent, stroking its rough scales and murmuring, "Isn't he beautiful?" while everyone else trembled with fear. Later, readers learned the dragon was actually a female, renamed Norberta, and eventually sent to live with Charlie Weasley in Romania. Hagrid's joy in hearing she had grown strong shows just how deep his affection ran. He was not interested in ownership or control. He wanted only to know the creature was alive and thriving. It was a love that expected nothing in return. Rowling admitted that Hagrid's obsession with dragons was no accident. It highlighted the essence of his character, his ability to see wonder where others saw only danger. To most wizards, dragons were fire-breathing threats to be avoided or hunted. To Hagrid, they were magnificent beings deserving of care. His heart belonged to them not because they were safe, but because they were wild, and he believed that even wildness deserved compassion. Number 12. His life could have been completely different. Hagrid's life was shaped by a single moment, his expulsion in third year. If the blame for opening the Chamber of Secrets had not fallen on him, the boy with a love for magical beasts might have finished his schooling. He might have gone on to teach care of magical creatures long before Professor Kettleburn, or even publish his own research. His fascination with dragons, hippogriffs, and even acromantulas showed a mind brimming with knowledge, even if not always expressed with polish. Dumbledore himself often remarked on Hagrid's gift with creatures, trusting him to care for beings that few others dared to touch. Rowling admitted that the tragedy of Hagrid is not his strength or his bloodline, but the loss of opportunity. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hagrid finally becomes a teacher, we see what could have been. He beams with pride as he introduces the class to Buckbeak. "You'll find that hippogriffs are very proud," he tells them, voice trembling with excitement. For a moment, Hagrid is not just the keeper of keys. He is a professor, standing tall before his students, sharing what he loves most. The scene is a glimpse into the life he was denied. Yet there is greatness in the path he did walk. As gamekeeper and guardian of the forest, Hagrid found a purpose others might have overlooked. He became the protector of creatures shunned by the wizarding world, from dragons to giants to even an outcast boy named Harry Potter. When Harry asked him in Philosopher's Stone if the wizarding world was really real, it was Hagrid who said the words that changed everything. "You're a wizard, Harry." No professor in a classroom could have carried that same weight. And so, the injustice that cut short his education also gave him a different kind of power. Hagrid became the bridge between the magical and the misunderstood, a man who defended what others feared. Rowling once said that Hagrid's role was to embody loyalty above skill, heart above intellect. If he had stayed a student, he might have gained recognition. Instead, he gained something rarer. He became the unshakable friend, the man who stood by Harry until the very end. Number 13, he always considered Dumbledore his saviour. For Hagrid, Albus Dumbledore was never just a headmaster. He was the man who stood by him when no one else would. At the age of 13, Hagrid was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets and causing the death of a student. He was expelled, his wand broken, his future destroyed. Yet Dumbledore, then a young professor of transfiguration, refused to believe the boy was guilty. That faith marked Hagrid for life. Dumbledore did more than defend him. He gave him a home. Instead of being cast out of the wizarding world, Hagrid was allowed to stay on the school grounds as the gamekeeper. It's all thanks to Dumbledore, of course, Hagrid once told Harry in The Chamber of Secrets. That line shows the depth of his gratitude. Without Dumbledore, he would have been an outcast, abandoned to a world that feared his giant blood. This trust shaped everything Hagrid became. Whenever Dumbledore asked for help, Hagrid never hesitated. It was Dumbledore who sent him to fetch Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow. It was Dumbledore who relied on him to guard the secret of the Sorcerer's Stone. Hagrid followed every order with absolute loyalty, not because of duty, but because he felt he owed his life to the man who had once saved him. The bond was more than respect. It was father and son, unspoken but undeniable. Dumbledore guided him, protected him, and gave him purpose. Hagrid, in return, gave unwavering devotion. When the world doubted him, when prejudice cut deep, he remembered the one man who never turned away. For Hagrid, Dumbledore was not simply a great wizard, he was the reason Hagrid had a place to belong. Number 14. His name appeared before his first entrance. Long before Rubeus Hagrid actually walked onto the page, his presence was already felt. In the very first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Minerva McGonagall stood on Privet Drive, arguing with Albus Dumbledore about leaving baby Harry with the Dursleys. In her words, a name slipped in. The name of a man who had not yet appeared, but whose role would be crucial. "Hagrid's bringing him, sir," she whispered, as if the weight of the mission needed no further explanation. That one line was more than a detail, it was a signal. J.K. Rowling chose to let readers hear Hagrid's name before they saw him. It gave him a shadow, a promise. By the time the great figure finally rode in on Sirius Black's flying motorbike, carrying the sleeping boy wrapped in blankets, readers already knew to expect him. His entrance was not random, it had been carefully prepared. The effect of this choice is subtle but powerful. Hagrid's name, spoken by McGonagall and confirmed by Dumbledore, attached trust and responsibility to him before readers even met the man himself. If Dumbledore, the wisest wizard, entrusted Harry to Hagrid, then Hagrid must be someone important. The storytelling device worked like foreshadowing. The enormous half-giant was destined to be more than just a secondary character. When Hagrid finally appears, the scene carries extra weight. Dumbledore does not introduce him, and Rowling does not need to explain who he is. The name has already been planted. The moment Hagrid steps off the bike and says, "Hagrid got him, sir," the reader feels recognition. It is as if we have been waiting for him all along. Rowling ensured that Hagrid's first appearance was not just an introduction, but a fulfillment of expectation. Number 15. He often hid his true strength. Hagrid's presence in the Harry Potter series is often remembered for his kindness, his loyalty, and his slightly clumsy nature. Yet one of the most fascinating and easily overlooked truths about him is the quiet restraint he lived with every single day. As a half-giant, his physical power was not just above average, it was monstrous by human standards. He could have crushed doors, bent metal, or subdued nearly any wizard with his bare hands, and yet he rarely did. In the narrative, J.K. Rowling leaves subtle hints about this reality, inviting us to see not only the strength that Hagrid possessed, but the choice he constantly made to hide it. The fact that this enormous power was not flaunted, but rather carefully contained, is one of the most moving aspects of his character. The most obvious demonstration of this hidden strength appears as early as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Hagrid first comes to collect Harry from the hut on the rock. Vernon Dursley had attempted to bar the door, but Hagrid casually breaks it down without a wand, and later bends Vernon's gun into a knot as if it were made of soft clay. The text reads, "He took the gun and twisted it into a knot as easily as if it had been made of rubber, and threw it into a corner of the room." This act is startling for Harry, but the story moves on so quickly that readers often overlook how unnatural such raw strength is. Few wizards could achieve this even with magic, yet Hagrid performs it without breaking a sweat. If he could twist steel like thread, imagine what his arms and hands were capable of against a human opponent. Rowling makes it clear that Hagrid's half-giant blood grants him resilience and force beyond that of ordinary people. In the Goblet of Fire, he survives being struck by stunning spells from multiple auras at once. In the same book, during the chaos in the forest after the Quidditch World Cup, Hagrid carries Harry, Hermione and Fang simultaneously through the trees, crashing forward with an urgency that does not seem to tax him at all. These passages emphasize the difference between Hagrid's body and those around him. Wizards depend on wands for strength and protection. Hagrid, even without a wand, is a force of nature. Yet he constantly downplays this. He chooses to live not as a warrior or soldier, but as a caretaker of animals and as a gentle presence in the lives of Harry and his friends. A striking example comes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. When Hagrid is wrongfully accused and sent to Azkaban, it is remarkable that he does not resist. Here is a man who could have easily fought off ministry officials. He could have destroyed the cell doors, overpowered guards, or simply fled into the forest. But he does none of this. Instead, he submits with quiet dignity because he understands that force would only deepen the prejudice already directed at him. His restraint in this moment is not weakness, it is strength channeled into self-control, and it shows how deeply he values being seen as more than just a brute. Rowling herself once explained in interviews that Hagrid hated being feared because of his size and power. As a child, he had been rejected from Hogwarts, expelled for crimes he did not commit, and cast aside as dangerous simply because of his half-giant blood. Giants in the wizarding world were seen as savage, violent, and uncontrollable, and Hagrid bore the shadow of this stereotype for his entire life. He knew that if he displayed even a fraction of his true power too openly, he risked confirming people's worst suspicions. This is why, despite being more powerful physically than most wizards, he often presented himself as bumbling, kind-hearted, and even laughably clumsy. His gentle demeanor was not just who he was, it was also his shield against society's fear. This restraint becomes even clearer when we consider how Hagrid treats magical creatures. He works with dragons, hippogriffs, acromantulas, and even blast-ended scroots, creatures that could injure or kill a normal human instantly. Yet Hagrid handles them with both tenderness and authority, relying less on sheer muscle and more on his understanding of their behavior. When Draco Malfoy insults Buckbeak in Prisoner of Azkaban, and the hippogriff reacts violently, it is Hagrid's calmness that restores order. The man who could have subdued the beast with brute strength instead uses care and patience, reinforcing that his real power lies not in dominance, but in control. In moments of danger, however, the mask sometimes slips and we catch a glimpse of his true potential. During the Battle of Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows, Hagrid smashes through the ranks of Death Eaters with such force that it terrifies even hardened fighters. His roar shakes the grounds, and his massive body becomes a moving fortress amid the chaos. Harry notices how even curses and attacks seem to bounce from him, but even here, Hagrid never uses his strength to kill. He frightens, restrains, and throws enemies aside, but he never loses himself to violence. That choice defines him. The irony is that Harry, Ron, and Hermione never fully realize how unusual Hagrid's restraint is. To them, he is simply their friend, the one who gives them rock cakes and guides them into the Forbidden Forest. They see his size, they notice his power in small bursts, but they never stop to think that every handshake, every lifted trunk, every push of a door is an act of moderation. Hagrid has to constantly measure his movements so as not to crush what he touches. Even simple gestures like clapping someone on the back carry danger when the hand is the size of a frying pan. His gentleness is therefore not an accident. It is practiced discipline. Number 16, he was almost killed in the 6th book. Of all the characters who walk through the pages of the Harry Potter series, Rubeus Hagrid stands out as one of the most enduring and beloved. Yet what many fans do not realize is that Hagrid's survival was not guaranteed during the writing of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. J.K. Rowling herself considered ending his story there, using his death as a brutal reminder of the costs of the war against Voldemort. The mere idea of Hagrid's demise shocks readers who associate him with warmth, loyalty, and a sense of stability, but in Rowling's planning notebooks there are hints that his life once balanced precariously on the edge of being sacrificed for narrative weight. Hagrid had been present from the very first chapter of Philosopher's Stone. He was the towering figure who carried the infant Harry out of the ruins of Godric's Hollow, his eyes glittering like black beetles as he sobbed over Lily and James Potter's deaths. His presence framed the beginning of Harry's journey, embodying both the magical world's mystery and its kindness. To imagine that the same figure could have been struck down before the final book is to recognize how different the tone of the saga might have been. Rowling wrestled with this, and her notes reportedly contained fragments of scenes where Hagrid would fall victim to the intensifying darkness engulfing Hogwarts. By the time of Half-Blood Prince, war had already begun to touch every aspect of the wizarding world. Dumbledore's hand was withered by the curse from the Horcrux ring, students whispered about Death Eaters infiltrating the castle, and Draco Malfoy was tasked with an assassination plot. Within this tense atmosphere, Rowling apparently drafted a scenario in which Hagrid, the gentle half-giant who loved every creature from hippogriffs to blast-ended scroots, would not survive the book's climax. His death would have mirrored the violence of the times, signalling that even Hogwarts' most familiar guardian could not withstand Voldemort's campaign of terror. Possible reason for this early idea can be traced to Hagrid's constant position on the edges of danger. He lived in his hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, often caught between human society and the wilderness of magical beasts. In Order of the Phoenix, he had already been attacked by Death Eaters while visiting the Giants, and upon returning to Hogwarts, he endured scrutiny from Dolores Umbridge, who tried to dismiss him from his post. The logic of war narratives often demands that a beloved figure fall in order to remind readers of what is at stake. Hagrid, with his massive frame and loyal heart, would have been a perfect candidate for such symbolic loss. Yet Rowling hesitated, and this hesitation reveals much about her vision for the series. In a later interview, she explained that she needed Hagrid alive to carry Harry's body from the Forbidden Forest in the final book. That haunting scene in Deathly Hallows where Hagrid stumbles into the clearing with the apparently lifeless Harry in his arms would not have been possible if Hagrid had perished earlier. Rowling wanted the image of the giant who had cradled Harry as a baby to carry him once more at what seemed to be his end. It was not only symmetry, but also a deliberate thread tying the first and last books together. The significance of this decision cannot be overstated. Hagrid became a symbol of constancy amid the chaos. Characters like Sirius Black, Albus Dumbledore, and even Fred Weasley would not survive, and their deaths shattered Harry's world. If Hagrid had joined that list in Half-Blood Prince, the tone of the later books would have been even more relentlessly grim. By sparing him, Rowling allowed one figure of kindness and loyalty to remain standing when the dust of war finally settled. His hut by the forest, battered though it was, endured as a place of familiarity and refuge. When Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower at the climax of Half-Blood Prince, Rowling had already given her readers the devastating loss that the narrative demanded. Dumbledore's death, described with the cruel flash of green light and the sound of something heavy and huge falling, was the emotional center of the book's tragedy. To add Hagrid's death alongside it might have overwhelmed the balance she sought. Instead, Hagrid's grief at Dumbledore's funeral, where his great shoulders shook under his moleskin coat, gave readers the emotional resonance without requiring yet another casualty. It is important to remember that Rowling's creative process often involved writing possible scenarios that she later discarded. In this case, she tested what the story would feel like if Hagrid died, and found that it stripped too much away from the spirit she wanted to preserve. She once said in an interview, "Hagrid represents for me the idea of a safe place, even when everything is crumbling." That idea crystallized during the later books, and keeping him alive ensured that readers always had at least one character who embodied simple, unwavering goodness. Examples from the text highlight this function. In Half-Blood Prince, after Death Eaters set fire to his hut, Hagrid still returned to rebuild it, refusing to abandon his role as keeper of keys and grounds. His resilience was not just physical, but symbolic, a refusal to let the darkness claim every corner of Hogwarts. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione visited him in times of doubt, he greeted them with rock cakes and tales of his creatures, reminding them that friendship and loyalty still mattered. Had Rowling allowed him to fall, these moments of respite would have disappeared. Number 17. He once had a patronus in early drafts. All the secrets hidden in the early drafts of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter saga, one of the most fascinating concerns Rubeus Hagrid and the Patronus charm. The published books are very clear. Hagrid never produces a patronus, and in fact he admits to Harry, in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, that he never managed to cast one. The reader is left with the impression that this difficult spell, requiring precise wand work and extraordinary concentration, is far beyond Hagrid's abilities. Yet in Rowling's first notes, written long before Philosopher's Stone reached publication, she considered the possibility that Hagrid would in fact possess his own patronus. The idea was ultimately abandoned, but the mere existence of this early plan allows us to imagine an alternate version of the story in which Hagrid's inner light, his capacity for joy and protection, manifests as an animal guardian. Rowling's handwritten notes, glimpsed in archives and interviews, reveal how fluid her early planning was. Characters swapped roles, names changed constantly, and magical details were often tested and discarded. In one of these embryonic sketches, she toyed with the thought that Hagrid might conjure a patronus in moments of danger. Early mentions suggested it could be a bear, a creature whose strength and size would match Hagrid's own imposing frame. Later, another possibility appeared, a dog representing loyalty and companionship. Both animals would have been fitting, and both would have deepened our understanding of Hagrid's character in subtle but profound ways. Instead, Rowling chose another route, insisting that the Patronus charm should remain difficult even for skilled wizards, and impossible for those who, like Hagrid, were expelled from school and denied full magical training. It is important to remember what the Patronus represents in the story. As Remus Lupin explains to Harry in Prisoner of Azkaban, the Patronus is not just a shield against Dementors, but a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. It is an externalization of the caster's best qualities. Harry's stag embodies his father's presence, Lily's doe shows her tenderness, and Dumbledore's phoenix echoes his lifelong connection with Fawkes. If Hagrid had been given a Patronus, it would have encapsulated the aspects of his soul that shine brightest: his protective instincts, his boundless love for magical creatures, and his unwavering loyalty to his friends. The idea of Hagrid producing a bear Patronus resonates with readers because the bear symbolizes guardianship, raw strength, and maternal protection. Hagrid is, at his core, a protector. He shields Harry from the Dursleys, he defends misunderstood creatures like Buckbeak and Aragog, and he never hesitates to place his own massive body between danger and those he loves. One can imagine a scene in Order of the Phoenix, during the terrifying flight of the Thestrals to the Ministry, in which Hagrid raises his pink umbrella, roars out to the incantation, and a colossal bear bursts forth from its tip, scattering Dementors in every direction. Such a vision would not only have been spectacular, but would also have crystallized the essence of Hagrid's character in magical form. On the other hand, the possibility of a dog Patronus also carries compelling meaning. Dogs symbolize loyalty, friendship, and unconditional love, qualities that define Hagrid's entire life. From the enormous Fang, who whines at the first sign of danger, yet adores Hagrid without fail, to the many beasts he raises and cares for, Hagrid has always been surrounded by canine devotion. If his Patronus had taken the shape of a massive hound, perhaps something akin to Fang, but fiercer and braver, it would have been a testament to his lifelong role as the faithful friend of Harry and Dumbledore. It would have been a magical mirror of his own steadfastness, reminding readers that loyalty is sometimes the most powerful defense. Rowling's decision to deny Hagrid this ability was rooted in realism within the magical world she constructed. The Patronus charm is advanced magic. Even accomplished witches and wizards struggle with it. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry teaches the members of Dumbledore's army to conjure Patronuses, very few succeed. Seamus Finnegan cannot manage more than a fuzzy wisp, and Cho Chang produces only a weak version. It is presented as a mark of exceptional magical strength, allowing Hagrid, who failed in his schooling, to perform it might have felt inconsistent. Rowling herself admitted in interviews that Hagrid could never do it. She wanted to preserve the authenticity of his magical limitations, even while showing his courage in other ways. But this rejection does not diminish the imaginative space fans occupy when they wonder what if. Online discussions often return to this discarded idea, and the debates are lively. Some argue for the bear, citing Hagrid's physicality and his protective role. Others prefer the dog, noting his emotional warmth and devotion. A few even suggest more unusual possibilities, a boarhound echoing Fang specifically, or even a dragon reflecting his lifelong fascination with dangerous creatures. The fact that Rowling once entertained the thought only fuels these debates, granting them legitimacy as part of the story's creative history. Number 18, his name appeared on early teaching lists. Of all the curious details hidden in the making of the Harry Potter saga, one of the most intriguing is the simple fact that Rubeus Hagrid, the half-giant groundskeeper with a heart as large as his frame, was at one point considered by J.K. Rowling as a potential professor of defense against the dark arts. It is almost impossible to imagine now because Hagrid is so firmly etched in our minds as the gentle guardian of magical creatures and the keeper of Hogwarts keys. Yet in the early drafts, before the roles of the Hogwarts faculty had fully solidified, his name appeared in the margins of Rowling's notebooks among candidates for that ever-cursed position. This single note opens up an entire world of what-if questions. What if? Hagrid had stood in the classroom where Quirrell once trembled, where Lockhart preened, and where Lupin quietly guided his students. How different would the story have been if the man who first led Harry into the wizarding world had also been tasked with teaching him how to defend it? Hagrid's suitability, at first glance, seems questionable. He is not a trained auror, not a skilled duelist, and his magic is incomplete, given that his wand was broken when he was expelled in his 3rd year. But the matter deserves deeper thought. Hagrid's lessons on magical creatures consistently showed his ability to inspire both fear and respect, as when he introduced the hippogriffs in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. "Hippogriffs are very proud," he told the class. "You always wait for them to make the furs move." In that single lesson lay the seeds of a philosophy that could easily be transposed onto the teaching of defense, that victory often depends not only on strength, but on respect, timing, and courage. Defense against the dark arts has always been about more than hexes and shields. It is about cultivating bravery, resilience, and the ability to stand tall in the face of threats. Hagrid embodied those qualities more naturally than almost any other character in the series. If one looks at Hagrid's history, his battles with prejudice and his loyalty to Dumbledore stand out as testaments to his resilience. Wrongly accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets and branded as a dangerous half-breed, he still remained faithful to Hogwarts, to the man who gave him a second chance, and to the belief that kindness can be stronger than cruelty. In a way, Hagrid's entire life was a defense against the dark arts of bigotry, slander, and suspicion. He protected Harry, Ron, and Hermione not only from magical creatures, but also from fear itself. Consider the moment in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone when he comforted Harry after learning the truth about his parents' deaths. "Not all wizards are good." That line, simple but powerful, taught Harry a lesson in vigilance that is at the core of defense against the dark arts. It was not spoken by a professor, yet it carried the weight of one. The great irony is that Hagrid had knowledge that no other professor could match. Lupin taught students about boggarts and dementors, Moody about curses, Snape about theory, but none of them could claim Hagrid's encyclopedic experience with the creatures that lurk beyond the edges of human society. He knew giants, dragons, acromantulas, thestrals, and centaurs. This catalogue of experience might not look like the standard defence curriculum, but when one thinks of the dangers that Harry and his friends faced, it suddenly seems practical. Facing a dragon in the Triwizard Tournament? Harry's first instinct was guided by the memory of Hagrid's lessons about how to treat magical beasts. Facing Aragog in the Forbidden Forest? Harry remembered that Hagrid had always emphasized respect even for the most terrifying creatures. This perspective could have reshaped the Defense Against the Dark Arts course into something far more holistic, less about repelling spells, and more about understanding the very nature of danger. It is also worth remembering how every Defense Against the Dark Arts professor after Quirrell was a fleeting figure, often doomed by the so-called curse on the position. Hagrid, however, was permanent. He was immovable. His loyalty was absolute, and his willingness to endure hardship made him a symbol of continuity. Imagine for a moment the difference it would have made if Harry had walked into his third-year defense class to find Hagrid instead of Professor Lupin. The boggart in the wardrobe might not have been confronted with a ridiculous spell, but perhaps with a reminder of courage, that the greatest monsters could be survived if faced directly. Hagrid would not have been able to teach elegant wand work, but he could have taught lessons of resilience that no curse could erode. When the trio followed Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest, they did so with fear, but also with trust. That trust is a rare and powerful teaching tool. Defense Against the Dark Arts professors often inspired skepticism, Lockhart's vanity, Moody's harshness, Snape's disdain, but Hagrid's students trusted him with their lives. That trust may have led to disasters, such as the incident with the blast-ended Scroots, but it also created bonds of loyalty. In The Goblet of Fire, Harry defended Hagrid when Rita Skeeter's article mocked his giant heritage, showing that Hagrid had already taught them one of the most valuable defences of all, defending a friend's honour against slander. In that sense, he had been teaching defense against the dark arts all along, just outside the official classroom. Rowling herself hinted at this possibility in early notes, where she listed Hagrid among the options for the role before deciding his character belonged in care of magical creatures. The reasoning was sound. His love of beasts defined his personality. Yet there is something tantalizing about imagining him in the place of Lockhart during Harry's second year. When confronted with the basilisk threat, Lockhart fled. Hagrid, by contrast, would have stood his ground. He may not have had the spells to slay such a creature, but his courage would have provided students with the one thing they needed most, faith that their teacher would not abandon them in the face of danger. Harry's own relationship with Hagrid demonstrates just how much of a mentor figure he was, from the very first moment on the rock in the sea when Hagrid announced, "You're a wizard, Harry!" He established himself as the first true guide Harry ever had. He gave Harry not only knowledge, but belonging. Every lesson in Defense Against the Dark Arts after that carried a sense of technical training, but none carried that deep, emotional assurance that Harry was not alone in the fight. This is perhaps the greatest reason Hagrid could have succeeded as a defense professor. He taught defense not merely as skill, but as companionship, loyalty, and love. Those are shields no spell could break. Consider the climactic moment in the Deathly Hallows when Hagrid carried Harry's seemingly lifeless body back to the castle. Though he was not wielding a wand, in that moment he embodied the purest form of defense, to shield hope, to carry it, and to keep it alive even in the face of despair. Students who might have sat in his classroom would have learned that defense is not always about attack or counters. Sometimes it is about standing when everyone else has fallen. It is about holding on when the world collapses around you. That is the lesson Hagrid carried, even without a chalkboard or spellbook. There is also the intriguing possibility that Hagrid's limitations as a wizard might have been his strength as a teacher. With his broken wand hidden in a pink umbrella, he relied more on heart and instinct than on magical theory. For students, this would have meant a different perspective, that even if one's magical skill is imperfect, courage can fill the gap. Neville Longbottom, who struggled in so many classes, might have found in Hagrid a teacher who understood weakness and turned it into power. Defense against the dark arts under Hagrid might have been less about flawless execution and more about the determination to keep fighting however clumsy the spell. When examining the failures of other defense professors, one sees the contrasts clearly. Quirrell crumbled under fear, Lockhart was hollow vanity, Umbridge was sadistic bureaucracy, and even Snape, though talented, could not inspire trust. Hagrid, for all his flaws, was never afraid, never false, never cruel. His teaching style might have been chaotic, his grammar unpolished, but his moral compass was steady. In times of darkness, those qualities matter more than eloquence or precision. A defense against the dark arts class with Hagrid at the helm would not have been clean or orderly, but it would have been honest, and honesty is itself a kind of shield against deceit, one of the darkest arts of all. The more one reflects, the more the idea of Hagrid as a defense against the dark arts professor ceases to feel strange and instead begins to feel inevitable. He had already trained Harry to confront dragons, to face forbidden forests, to believe in the power of friendship, and to trust in his own courage. Each of these was a defense against something darker than a mere curse. Perhaps the drafts that listed Hagrid's name were not mere accidents, but glimpses of a truth Rowling carried in her imagination, that Hagrid, though not in the classroom, was always Harry's first and truest defense against the dark arts teacher. Number 19, his soul remained in Hogwarts. Hagrid's presence at Hogwarts has always carried an air of permanence, as though he were not just a resident but a piece of the very foundation stones. Long before Harry Potter ever set foot in the castle, Hagrid had been there, surviving his expulsion and carving out a life among the trees, stones and shadows of the grounds. His first years as a student were cut short when he was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets. Tom Riddle's sly manipulations led to his wand being snapped, and he was branded forever as an outcast. Yet while others might have turned away in shame or resentment, Hagrid remained. Dumbledore found a place for him as keeper of keys and grounds, a role that tied him irrevocably to the land of Hogwarts. It was not simply employment, it was an unspoken covenant. Though denied a complete education, Hagrid gave himself entirely to the school. His loyalty became his penance, but also his triumph. In every sense, his soul was anchored to Hogwarts. This anchoring can be seen in his daily rituals. Hagrid was not a man of luxury or distraction. His world revolved around the grounds and the creatures within it. The Forbidden Forest, dangerous and forbidden to most students, was for Hagrid a second home. He nurtured acromantulas like Aragog, raised hippogriffs such as Buckbeak, and even attempted to hide his half-brother Grawp among the trees. Each creature was connected to Hogwarts because Hagrid himself was connected to it. His bond with the land made him fearless where others saw danger. J.K. Rowling writes of him with constant earthiness. There was only one place Hagrid was likely to be given the hour: his hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. His hut, neither quite a house nor a dormitory, stood like a symbolic outpost of Hogwarts, blending the line between safety and peril. In it, Hagrid represented the living bridge between the human community of the castle and the wilderness pressing against its walls. Hagrid's endurance through exile and suspicion further solidifies the sense that his soul had nowhere else to belong. When the Ministry of Magic arrested him in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, accusing him once again of opening the chamber, Hagrid's first thoughts were not of himself but of Hogwarts. Before being taken away, he offered Harry and Ron cryptic guidance, saying, if anyone wanted to find out all they'd have to do is follow the spiders. Even at that moment of injustice, his priority was the safety of the school. That instinct to act in defense of Hogwarts even while being dragged away in chains reveals the truth that he lived more for the castle than for himself. Many staff members came and went over the decades, but Hagrid endured as though the stones themselves held him fast. Another sign of his permanence lies in his relationships with students across generations. Hagrid treated Harry, Ron, and Hermione as though they were his family, but it was not unique to them. Years earlier, he had shown similar warmth to others who needed it, remnants of kindness that filtered through the student body over decades. Harry's first birthday cake at Hogwarts, baked clumsily by Hagrid, symbolized more than hospitality. It was a gift from Hogwarts itself, carried through its most devoted servant. Hagrid's soul expressed itself in acts of loyalty, food, and companionship. By living for Hogwarts, he became a surrogate father to those who lacked one, embodying the school's role as a home for the lost and the lonely. The contrast with other figures who left Hogwarts sharpens our understanding of Hagrid's unique bond. Severus Snape, for instance, also tied his fate to the school, but his connection was rooted in ambition, guilt, and secrecy. Snape used the walls as a fortress for his double life. Hagrid, by contrast, lived in open simplicity, allowing his loyalty to be seen plainly. When Harry reflected that Hagrid never seemed to notice the danger in the same way others did, it revealed not naivety but a spiritual fusion. He simply could not conceive of a Hogwarts in which he was not present. Even exile did not sever the thread, as shown by his return after every accusation or setback. Snape's relationship with Hogwarts was an affair of the mind and strategy, while Hagrid's was of the heart and soul. The Battle of Hogwarts revealed perhaps the clearest glimpse of Hagrid's soul being bound to the castle. When the Death Eaters overran the grounds, Hagrid stood in open defiance despite being captured and beaten. His cries for Harry, "Harry, no, Harry!" as he saw the boy's limp body carried in by Voldemort, were not only expressions of grief but also of outrage that Hogwarts might fall to darkness. He roared as though the walls themselves were being torn down. His anguish was inseparable from the fate of the school. To see Hogwarts suffer was to see his own soul torn apart, and yet even then his survival was symbolic. Hagrid remained alive after the battle, still, standing among the wreckage as unshakable as the castle itself. The endurance of Hagrid's loyalty must also be considered in light of his half-giant heritage. Giants were creatures without permanent homes, forever wandering, fighting, and destroying. In making Hogwarts his sanctuary, Hagrid defied the restlessness of his kind. He embraced the idea of permanence where others of his bloodline could not. His hut, his pumpkins, his boarhounds, these became extensions of his identity. His soul, instead of wandering like the giants of the mountains, rooted itself in the soil of the castle grounds. His presence was proof that Hogwarts could transform even a half-giant into a guardian, just as it had transformed orphans like Harry into heroes. We can also trace the symbol of keys. As keeper of keys, Hagrid physically held access to the doors of the castle, yet symbolically he also held the key to its heart. The opening of the locked door for Harry in the hut on the rock was not merely the start of a school year, it was the initiation into a larger family. "Harry, you're a wizard." Those words, spoken by Hagrid, were the true key that opened Hogwarts to him. Countless generations may have passed through the gates, but only one figure consistently stood at the threshold, Hagrid. His role made him the embodiment of entry and belonging, the soul that invited others in because he himself could never leave. It is striking that Hagrid was often underestimated by others. Characters like Cornelius Fudge or Dolores Umbridge saw him as a bumbling oaf. Yet this very underestimation allowed his influence to seep more deeply into Hogwarts's soul. He did not dominate with power, but nurtured with care. His bond with Harry demonstrates this. He was the first to welcome him, the one who fetched him from the Dursleys, and the one who carried him out of the forest at the supposed end. The symmetry of these actions suggests a cycle. Hagrid ushered Harry into the life of Hogwarts and bore him in its darkest hour. This cycle of entry and exit reveals the depth of his anchoring to the school's destiny. Dumbledore's trust in Hagrid must also be emphasized. Albus Dumbledore was a man who measured carefully whom to trust, and yet he consistently entrusted Hagrid with tasks of great importance. From sending him to deliver Harry to the Dursleys to giving him missions with the Giants during the Second Wizarding War, Dumbledore relied on him in ways that reflected more than practicality. Dumbledore understood that Hagrid's loyalty was not to him personally, but to Hogwarts itself. This made him incorruptible. Others could be tempted, threatened, or deceived, but Hagrid's soul had only one master, the castle and what it represented. Another example of Hagrid's connection can be seen in the care he extended to his students, even outside his duties. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione were crushed by grief after Sirius Black's death, Hagrid offered clumsy but heartfelt words, reminding them that the world still needed them. He gave comfort not as a professor, but as the living spirit of Hogwarts itself, whispering that the castle always carried on. His hut became a refuge for the trio, a place where they could face truths more honestly than in the great marble halls. In this way, Hagrid's soul gave Hogwarts its humanity. We must also note the way Hogwarts itself seemed to embrace him. Though denied the full privileges of a wizard, the castle never expelled his presence. He remained when ministers changed, when professors rotated, and when wars rose and fell. Hagrid was as much a fixture as the moving staircases or the portraits that lined the walls. He did not teach in classrooms, but he instructed in loyalty, resilience, and courage. Every pumpkin he grew and every creature he tamed was part of Hogwarts' living heartbeat. Rowling's description of Hagrid often tied him to the natural landscape. Hagrid's enormous hands were as hard as tree roots, and his shaggy hair seemed as wild as the forest. In this imagery, Hagrid becomes not merely a resident, but a feature of the grounds themselves. Like the Black Lake or the Whomping Willow, he was a permanent part of the Hogwarts environment. Students changed, professors changed, even Dark Lords rose and fell. But Hagrid endured like an ancient oak. His legacy was sealed by his role at key moments of transition. He carried baby Harry to the Dursleys' doorstep, introducing the boy to a destiny intertwined with Hogwarts. Years later, he carried the apparently dead Harry back to the castle in Voldemort's grasp. These two acts of carrying, the first to a new beginning, the second to a seeming end, frame the entire saga. Both moments were performed not by Dumbledore, McGonagall, or any celebrated wizard, but by Hagrid. It was his soul that bore the weight of Hogwarts history on his shoulders. In the end, Hagrid was not simply a half-giant with a fondness for creatures. He was the guardian spirit of Hogwarts, a living symbol that traditions and secrets could survive even betrayal, even war. His loyalty, unbroken by injustice, turned his life into a testament of belonging. Others may have left, died, or forgotten, but Hagrid remained, his soul rooted in the stone, soil, and magic of the castle. For as long as Hogwarts stands, it will bear not only the memories of students and teachers, but also the enduring soul of Rubeus Hagrid. Number 20, he was called a second home by students. Of all the adults who moved through the lives of Hogwarts students, few carried the same weight of comfort, trust, and familiarity as Rubeus Hagrid. His hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest was more than a modest wooden dwelling. It became a sanctuary, a refuge when the castle's stone walls felt too cold or too overwhelming. Rowling's drafts suggest that it was not only Harry, Ron, and Hermione who sought out the warmth of Hagrid's hearth. Many students, lost in the turbulence of adolescence and the pressures of magical education, quietly found their way to that hut. They left behind the echoing corridors of the castle and stepped into a place where the smell of damp earth and tea leaves promised something less formal, but infinitely more human. When Harry first knocked on Hagrid's door in his first year, he was greeted with a booming voice and the scent of burning rock cakes. This was the moment a pattern began. Whenever confusion or despair grew heavy, Hagrid was there, ready to make tea and listen. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, Hagrid looked at him with great affection. "You'll be all right, Harry. You'll make a great wizard." These words were more than reassurance. They became an anchor. But the remarkable thing is that Harry's experience was far from unique. Many students who never appeared on the pages of the novels are hinted at in Rowling's notes, finding that same steadying hand and that same heavy mug of tea. The hut was not glamorous, nor particularly comfortable. It was filled with clutter, crossbows, and the constant smell of animals, both domestic and dangerous. Yet this very chaos created an atmosphere that invited honesty. There was no pretense with Hagrid. His home was a place where the rules of house rivalry softened, where a Slytherin might sit beside a Hufflepuff without the tension that often defined the Great Hall. Rowling's unpublished notes describe younger students who sought Hagrid's company after a fight with friends, a failed spell, or the sting of a professor's criticism. What mattered was not that the tea was too strong or that the rock cakes could chip a tooth, but that someone listened without judgment. Consider Neville Longbottom, a boy who often stumbled in his classes and whose confidence seemed as fragile as his memory. In Chamber of Secrets, after a particularly humiliating day in potions, Rowling notes Neville left the dungeons with his face as red as a boiled beet. Though the scene does not appear in detail, drafts suggest that Neville once sat in Hagrid's hut, nursing a cup of tea, while Hagrid reminded him that even the greatest wizards started somewhere. The effect was profound. Neville's courage later in the series can be traced not only to his grandmother's high expectations, but also to the quieter moments when someone like Hagrid made him feel seen. Luna Lovegood, too, is a student whose eccentricities often left her isolated. Her peers mocked her spectre specs, her radish earrings, and her constant belief in creatures no one else could see. Yet Luna found kindness in Hagrid's presence. His love for misunderstood beasts mirrored her own outlook on life. In Order of the Phoenix, Luna attends one of Hagrid's care of magical creatures lessons with rapt attention, smiling at a thestral while others recoil. After class, it is easy to imagine Luna lingering by the hut, not because she was required, but because here she was not odd, she was understood. Even Draco Malfoy, the boy who so often derided Hagrid, carried an indirect connection to that hut. While Draco himself never came to Hagrid for comfort, drafts suggest that other Slytherins did. They did so quietly for fear of ridicule, but they came nonetheless. One unnamed Slytherin girl is mentioned in Rowling's notes as having sought refuge after her parents' letters demanded perfect grades. For a student crushed by expectation, the warmth of Hagrid's hut offered an unspoken reprieve, far from the sharp competitiveness of her house common room. It is telling that Hagrid's comfort came not in lectures but in presence. He offered students space to breathe, mugs that warmed their hands, and the odd joke that lightened the atmosphere. Hagrid poured tea into a large chipped mug and handed it to Harry. The tea was strong and sweet, and Harry felt a little better just holding it, Rowling writes in Prisoner of Azkaban. That same comfort translated across the student body. The hut became a place where holding a cup of too strong tea was itself a ritual of healing, a signal that someone cared enough to notice when life grew overwhelming. Hermione Granger's relationship with Hagrid provides another window into his role as a safe haven. When she was vilified during the Triwizard Tournament for supposedly dating Victor Crumb, and later when Rita Skeeter's articles turned her into a target of ridicule, Hermione often turned to Hagrid. In Goblet of Fire, she spends time in his hut, and though the book focuses on their concern for his safety, after Skeeter exposed his giant heritage, one can see how the exchange of vulnerability went both ways. Hermione defended him fiercely, and in turn, Hagrid gave her space to vent frustrations about a world too quick to judge. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, are remembered for their jokes, their pranks, and their refusal to take life seriously. Yet even they were not immune to the stresses of adolescence. Rowling's notes suggest that once, after a particularly stern punishment from their mother, they hid out at Hagrid's hut until dinner, sipping tea and laughing about how no prank could possibly match Molly Weasley's fury. For the twins, Hagrid was not only a protector of the younger students, but also an equal in mischief, someone who understood the joy of a well-placed joke, even while reminding them where the line ought to be drawn. There is also the example of Ginny Weasley, who in her first year endured the terrifying ordeal of Tom Riddle's diary and the Chamber of Secrets. When she returned to Hogwarts, fragile and haunted by what had happened, Hagrid's hut was among the few places where she could sit quietly without questions. Rowling describes Ginny as becoming rather withdrawn in her second year, but it is clear that the trust she shared with Hagrid helped her heal. A cup of tea in that wooden hut did not erase trauma, but it reminded her she was still a child allowed moments of peace. The relationship between Hagrid and Harry, Ron, and Hermione forms the central example of this broader phenomenon. Time and again, when despair threatened to overwhelm them, they turned instinctively to the hut by the forest. After Harry's name was drawn from the Goblet of Fire, he felt the castle turn against him, whispers echoing in every corridor. Rowling notes, Harry went straight down to Hagrid's. He was the only person who seemed to believe him. The hut became his shield, and the man who lived within its cluttered walls was his steadfast believer. In that moment, it was not just friendship but sanctuary, the same sanctuary countless unnamed students quietly shared. The very location of Hagrid's hut adds to its symbolism. Positioned at the edge of the forbidden forest, it lay between safety and danger, a liminal space where students could confront fears, yet find safety. To step into the hut was to acknowledge the wilderness beyond, but also to be reminded that it could be faced with courage and kindness. The hut's crooked walls, the fire crackling in the hearth, and Fang sprawled at the foot of the bed, created an environment that invited honesty, even tears. For teenagers burdened by exams, rivalries, and the complexities of identity, this mattered more than most professors could imagine. Hagrid's role as a surrogate parent was not limited to Harry. He embodied something Hogwarts often lacked: unconditional acceptance. Professors expected excellence, prefects enforced rules, and ghosts carried centuries of weighty tradition. But Hagrid, with his broad hands and unpolished speech, represented the idea that a student could simply exist, valued not for achievement but for being. This was why even those who mocked him in public sometimes found themselves at his hut, in private, sharing tea and silence. In many ways, Hagrid was Hogwarts' hidden guardian of hearts. He did not teach in the grand lecture halls, nor did he hold sway in political battles within the ministry. But his hut stood as a testament to the quieter forms of heroism, the kind that offers shelter to a scared first year, reassurance to a struggling fifth year, or companionship to a lonely seventh year preparing to leave Hogwarts forever. To call his home a second home for students is not an exaggeration. It was the place where they learned that kindness, even in its simplest form, could change everything. This understanding of Hagrid reshapes the way one sees Hogwarts. The school was not just towers, spells, and exams. It was also the laughter around Hagrid's cluttered table, the steam rising from chipped mugs, and the quiet knowledge that in times of confusion one could walk down to the edge of the forest and find a man who would welcome them without question. Hagrid was not simply the keeper of keys and grounds, he was the keeper of something far greater, the fragile hearts of young wizards and witches learning how to grow up in a world that often seemed too dangerous, too demanding, or too indifferent. And in that hut they found the warmth they needed to keep going. Number 21. His destiny mirrors Gryffindor's traits. Hagrid's life has always been one of contradiction and quiet tragedy, yet if one observes closely, it becomes clear that his fate mirrors the very essence of Gryffindor House. He is not just a loyal servant of Hogwarts or a keeper of its grounds, but a living embodiment of the qualities Godric Gryffindor cherished most: bravery, loyalty, and the courage to act when others hesitate. The story of Rubeus Hagrid is therefore not merely about a gentle giant raising dangerous creatures. It is about a man whose life is marked by choices that echo the founding ideals of his house, even when those choices brought him pain. The first and perhaps most striking parallel to Gryffindor is Hagrid's relentless courage. Godric Gryffindor himself, according to legend, was a wizard who prized bravery over caution. In much the same way, Hagrid's decisions often reveal a boldness that borders on recklessness. When Hagrid first appears in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he smashes through the door of the hut on the rock to deliver Harry his letter. This act, filled with raw determination, is reminiscent of a knight breaking through enemy lines. As Hagrid says in that moment, "Dry up, Dursley, you great prune." It was not just a declaration of authority, but also a defense of a helpless boy against oppression, an act entirely Gryffindor in nature. Yet, as is often the case with Gryffindors, Hagrid's bravery comes without careful thought. Like Godric Gryffindor, who took the risk of accepting Muggle-born students despite the wrath of his contemporaries, Hagrid too accepts dangers that most would shun. His affection for the three-headed dog Fluffy, or his decision to raise a dragon in a wooden hut, shows how his heart rules over caution. "Norbert's just a baby. I can't just hand him over to some strangers," he insists in Philosopher's Stone. His courage often pushes him to protect creatures and people who cannot defend themselves, even at great personal cost. Another reflection of Gryffindor's legacy is found in Hagrid's loyalty. Few characters in the series demonstrate devotion with such steadfastness. His allegiance to Dumbledore is unshakable. When Cornelius Fudge attempts to remove Dumbledore from Hogwarts in Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid is dragged away to Azkaban. Yet his final words to the trio before leaving show his faith. If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. Even in the face of imprisonment, Hagrid chose to act as Dumbledore's messenger, never once betraying the trust placed in him. Gryffindor himself is remembered for standing firm against Salazar Slytherin, a man he once called friend. Hagrid, like Gryffindor, knows that loyalty sometimes demands painful sacrifice. This loyalty is not limited to Dumbledore. It extends to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who often receive his unwavering support. When Umbridge banned them from learning defensive spells, Hagrid risked punishment by bringing the trio deep into the forest to meet Grawp. Though ill-prepared and nearly reckless, it was an act of faith in the young Gryffindors, entrusting them with his secret. Such blind loyalty often caused him trouble, but it is this very quality that defines him as a Gryffindor. He believes in others even when the rest of the world doubts them. Equally important is Hagrid's willingness to shoulder burdens that would crush others. Gryffindor House is defined by the courage to fight for others rather than oneself, and Hagrid embodies this through his self-sacrifice. Consider his decision to accompany Harry in Deathly Hallows during the Battle of the Seven Potters. Despite his lack of dueling skill, he chose to face a sky filled with Death Eaters while driving a motorbike through fire and curses. His role was not glamorous, but it was vital, and he placed himself in harm's way simply because Harry needed protection. "Hold tight, Harry!" he shouted as curses rained down. In that chaos, Hagrid was the shield, the embodiment of Gryffindor's protective spirit. The shadow of tragedy also binds him to Gryffindor. Godric's legacy was built on division, on the painful split between himself and Slytherin. Likewise, Hagrid's life is shaped by expulsion, prejudice, and exile. He was cast out of Hogwarts, wand broken, and branded as dangerous, all for a crime he did not commit. His half-giant blood made him a target of suspicion, much like Gryffindor himself faced hostility for his openness to Muggle-borns. This parallel reminds us that to live by Gryffindor's ideals often means living with suffering. True courage is tested in the furnace of injustice, and Hagrid passed that test again and again. His relationship with magical creatures also reflects Gryffindor's values. Where others saw beasts, Hagrid saw misunderstood beings worthy of respect. He raised hippogriffs, thestrals, acromantulas, and dragons, not out of recklessness alone, but because he believed that fear must never override compassion. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Buckbeak is sentenced to death, Hagrid weeps openly, saying, "They can't kill him, it's not fair." His fight for Buckbeak mirrors Gryffindor's own fight for fairness in education. Both men challenged the prejudices of their worlds, even when it placed them in danger. The connection becomes even clearer in the way Dumbledore entrusted Hagrid with sensitive missions. Gryffindor valued not cunning or ambition, but heart. Dumbledore recognized this same quality in Hagrid, which is why he gave him tasks no one else would. From retrieving the Philosopher's Stone's guardian creature to escorting Harry safely to Privet Drive to carrying Harry's body from the forest in Deathly Hallows, Hagrid was chosen because he acted from love. Harry was a baby in a bundle of blankets asleep, Hagrid recalls of that first journey, and I carried ye out of the ruins myself. These moments echo with the certainty that Dumbledore saw in Hagrid the soul of a true Gryffindor. Even in his vulnerability, Hagrid reflects the house's ethos. Gryffindors are not fearless, they act despite fear. Hagrid is often insecure, painfully aware of his expulsion and his half-breed status. When Rita Skeeter slanders him in Goblet of Fire, he retreats into hiding, ashamed. Yet he returns, bolstered by Dumbledore's words. "If the heads of the school ever stop trusting you, Hagrid, you will be the last to know." That moment is vital. It shows that Gryffindor courage is not about never falling, but about rising again with renewed strength. Perhaps the most poignant parallel is seen in his role during the Battle of Hogwarts. As the castle burned and giants clashed outside the gates, Hagrid fought not with spells but with raw determination. His voice rose above the chaos, rallying the defenders, calling Harry's name when all seemed lost. And when he carried Harry's seemingly lifeless body back to the castle, he repeated Gryffindor's lesson. Courage means standing in the darkest hour, even when hope is gone. "Harry, no, no!" he cried, his grief echoing through the grounds. Yet even in grief he stood firm, unwilling to let despair paralyze him. It is no accident that Hagrid's hut stands on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Symbolically, he lives on the border between danger and safety, the wild and the civilized. Gryffindor House itself occupies a similar threshold. It is the place where students learn to cross the line between fear and bravery. Hagrid's home is not within the castle walls, but beside them, a reminder that courage often means living at the edge, unafraid of the shadows. The students of Gryffindor, especially Harry, Ron, and Hermione, find in Hagrid a mentor who embodies their house's values more purely than perhaps anyone else. He does not teach formal classes of bravery, yet his life is one long lesson in it. When he tells Harry in Philosopher's Stone, "I'd trust Dumbledore with me life," it is not just a statement of loyalty, it is the creed of a Gryffindor, spoken without hesitation. Through his example, the trio learned that courage is not always found in duels or victories, but in the willingness to risk ridicule, rejection, and even imprisonment for what is right. One could argue that Hagrid's flaws are precisely what make him such a perfect reflection of Gryffindor. His lack of caution, his tendency to trust the wrong people, his impulsive choices, all mirror the weaknesses of a house that prizes action over deliberation. Yet those flaws are inseparable from his strengths. Just as Gryffindor himself could not compromise on his ideals, Hagrid cannot silence his heart. To deny him those flaws would be to strip away the essence of Gryffindor itself, bravery in imperfection. In the end, Hagrid's destiny is not to become a hero in the traditional sense. He is no Dumbledore or Harry, no wielder of legendary spells. His destiny is quieter, yet no less profound, to live a life that embodies the spirit of Godric Gryffindor. Through courage, loyalty, sacrifice and love, Hagrid repeats the story of the founder, reminding all who know him that bravery comes in many forms. He is, in every sense, Gryffindor's reflection, walking in flesh. Number 22, he was supposed to appear in the epilogue. Of all the characters in J.K. Rowling's vast and layered world of Harry Potter, few are as unforgettable as Rubeus Hagrid. His enormous presence, both physical and emotional, has always loomed over the series, starting from the very first book when he appeared on a flying motorbike, carrying an orphaned baby who bore the lightning-shaped scar. What many readers do not know, however, is that Rowling once considered including Hagrid one final time in the epilogue of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It would have been a moment of poetic closure. The man who introduced Harry to the magical world would be the one to wave goodbye as Harry's children stepped into it. Though this image never made it into the printed version, it remains a powerful what-if that reshapes how we see the ending. The epilogue as it stands is iconic in its simplicity. 19 years after the Battle of Hogwarts, Harry Potter and Ginny Weasley accompany their children, James Sirius, Albus Severus, and Lily Luna, to platform 9 3/4. The details are small and tender. The scar Harry bore all his life has not pained him for years, and he reassures his son Albus about the Sorting Hat's decision. The scene deliberately echoes the opening of the saga when Harry himself first stepped onto the platform in Philosopher's Stone. But in Rowling's early notes, Hagrid was supposed to be there too, present not as a central figure but as a quiet guardian in the background, raising his massive hand in farewell as the train carried off a new generation. It was a subtle, almost symbolic gesture that would have tied the story back to its roots. To understand why fans feel this moment would have mattered, one has to look back at Hagrid's role in Harry's life. From the first time he told the boy, "You're a wizard, Harry," Hagrid was more than just a keeper of keys and grounds. He was the first adult to ever look at Harry not as a burden, not as a nuisance, but as someone special and worthy of love. Rowling wrote him with a warmth that balanced his rough edges, his misjudgments, and his fondness for dangerous creatures. The boy who lived, who spent his early years in a cupboard under the stairs, needed someone like Hagrid to open the door to belonging. To see him again in the epilogue would have underscored how unwaveringly present he remained, a constant thread running through Harry's life. One cannot forget that Hagrid was the figure who physically carried Harry away from both the beginning and the end of his battles. He carried him as a baby from the wreckage of Godric's Hollow, and later, in one of the most heart-wrenching scenes of the entire series, he carried what appeared to be Harry's lifeless body out of the Forbidden Forest. Rowling describes the moment with devastating imagery. Hagrid's arms, covered in black hair and muscles like ropes, were cradling Harry, whose head lolled limply, his glasses askew. For the reader, Hagrid was a constant presence in both birth and supposed death, a symbol of protection. The absence of his towering figure in the epilogue feels, to many, like a missing heartbeat in the final rhythm of the story. The proposed image of Hagrid waving on the platform carries with it layers of meaning. Platform 9 3/4 is not just a location, it is a threshold, the liminal space between the ordinary and the extraordinary. For Harry, it was the place where his childhood in the Muggle world ended and his life in the Wizarding world began. Hagrid's silent presence there would have reminded readers that he was the very first bridge across that divide. Having him wave goodbye would have symbolized not just continuity but the eternal safeguarding of that bridge. For the children of Harry and Ginny, Hagrid would have been the same watchful giant he was for their father. There is also the deeply personal connection between Hagrid and Harry that goes beyond teacher or friend. He was, in many ways, family. Hagrid baked him his first birthday cake, a crude but heartfelt pink confection with "Happy Birthday, Harry" scrawled across it in green icing. He gifted Harry his first owl, Hedwig, a symbol of independence and companionship. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry and Ron fought for his innocence when he was taken to Azkaban, protesting loudly even when they were powerless to stop the injustice. Their loyalty to him reflected his loyalty to them. Rowling consistently portrayed Hagrid as flawed yet fiercely loyal, and his relationship with Harry was one of the purest bonds in the saga. To omit him from the conclusion feels, for many, like leaving out a family member at the final reunion. Fans have often noted that Rowling's chosen ending deliberately emphasized family and the continuation of life after trauma. It was not about battles or magic, but about small gestures of reassurance and love. In this frame, Hagrid could have appeared not as a disruptor of this peace, but as its affirmation. Imagine the children waving back to the giant who once lifted their father out of despair, or Ginny exchanging a smile with the man who fought by her side during the Battle of Hogwarts. Such a moment would have been quiet but profound, encapsulating the series' central message that bonds of loyalty and love endure far longer than fear or hatred. Rowling herself has explained that she wanted the epilogue to feel very calm, deliberately so, after the mayhem and murder of the battle. Perhaps Hagrid's appearance was sacrificed in service of this calmness, so as not to introduce another focal point that might distract from Harry's role as father. Yet the idea that Hagrid was once penciled in suggests that Rowling recognized his significance as a bookend figure. His absence is not a denial of his importance, but a reminder that stories are shaped as much by what is left unsaid as by what is spoken. The giant who always stood at the edge of the narrative, half in the magical world, half in the wilderness of creatures, remains an eternal presence, whether written or not. The emotional resonance of Hagrid's potential presence is amplified by the fact that he is one of the few central characters who survives the series unscathed. Many others, Lupin, Tonks, Fred Weasley, and even Dobby, do not make it to the end. Hagrid, however, endures. To see him in the epilogue would have been a reminder of resilience, of the guardians who live on even after wars have ended. It would have been a comfort not just to Harry's children, but to readers who had wept through the losses of beloved characters. Hagrid standing there, smiling and waving, would have been an unspoken reassurance that not all good things are lost to time. It is worth noting that Rowling often spoke of Hagrid with a certain fondness. In interviews, she admitted that his role in carrying Harry from the forest was decided early in the planning stages, years before she wrote the final book. She said she wanted Hagrid to be the one to carry Harry out of the forest because it had to be Hagrid. He was there at the beginning and had to be there at the end. This statement reveals the centrality of Hagrid to the overall structure of the saga. If he was deemed so essential in the climax, then surely his presence at the story's closing curtain would have carried equal symbolic weight. The absence of Hagrid from the epilogue has not stopped fans from envisioning the moment for themselves. Fan art often depicts the giant standing on the platform, his hair wild, his massive hand raised in farewell. Some fan fictions even rewrite the ending to include him, giving him lines of encouragement to Harry's children, or a warm grin to the family. These reimaginings are not merely acts of wish fulfillment. They are expressions of readers' collective sense that Hagrid embodies the heart of the story. His love is unpretentious, his loyalty unquestionable, his presence a reminder that heroes come in many forms. One particularly striking fan theory suggests that Hagrid's role in the epilogue was never meant to be grand, but almost invisible, a detail you might notice only on reread. Imagine scanning the platform scene and, tucked in a corner of the description, seeing behind them Hagrid waved, his enormous hand rising above the crowd. Such a sentence would have transformed the atmosphere of the passage, turning it into a full circle. It would not have stolen the focus from Harry and his children, but would have added a final brushstroke of continuity to the canvas. Even without this epilogue moment, Hagrid's legacy is etched into every major event of the saga. He introduced the trio to Aragog in Chamber of Secrets, he accompanied Harry to the Quidditch World Cup in Goblet of Fire, and he defended Hogwarts fiercely in Deathly Hallows. He was a constant participant in the battles that defined the wizarding world, but always with a personal loyalty that went beyond duty. For Harry, Hagrid was more than a friend. He was proof that kindness could flourish in the unlikeliest places, that truth remains with or without the final wave on Platform 9 3/4. Ultimately, the knowledge that Rowling once planned for Hagrid to be in the epilogue does not diminish the ending as it exists, but enriches it. It allows readers to imagine another layer of meaning, a spectral presence that hovers around the closing words. When Harry tells his son all was well, one can picture, just beyond the frame, a half-giant guardian nodding in agreement, his beetle-black eyes shining with pride. For Hagrid has always stood as the boundary between worlds, and perhaps it is fitting that even in absence, he still guards that threshold. Number 23. His father was a simple man. Of all the characters in the Harry Potter universe, Rubeus Hagrid stands out as one of the most beloved and unforgettable. His immense size, gentle heart, and unwavering loyalty to Harry and his friends make him unique. Yet hidden behind his shaggy hair, booming laugh, and strong hands lies a story about his parentage that many readers overlook. Hagrid is a half-giant. His mother, Fridwulfa, belonged to a race known for their great size and strength, but his father was nothing like her. He was a simple, ordinary man of very small stature, whose love and care left a lasting mark on Hagrid's soul. J.K. Rowling herself crafted this family history as both ironic and touching. The juxtaposition of a tiny wizard raising a son who grew larger than him before reaching adolescence paints a poignant picture of love and resilience. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Hagrid opens up about his past in a conversation with Madame Maxime. He admits, "Me dad was dead small, see? By the time I was 6, I could pick him up and put him on top of the dresser if he annoyed me. Used to carry him around in me pocket if the weather was bad." This confession, delivered with Hagrid's typical rough humour, actually reveals something profoundly moving about his childhood. Imagine a boy already towering above most children his age, yet clinging to the memory of a father who never seemed intimidated by his son's size. The warmth of their relationship emerges despite the apparent absurdity of such a pairing. Few fans stop to consider how extraordinary it must have been for Hagrid's father to raise him alone after Fridwulfa abandoned them. Giants are not known for their nurturing qualities, and Hagrid admits his mother left when he was very young. This meant that his father, who could not have been more than a fraction of his son's height, had to care for a boy whose physical needs surpassed anything he could easily provide. How did a small wizard manage the clothing, food, and housing for a half-giant child? Rowling does not describe these details, but the imagination paints vivid scenarios of hardship. One can picture his father using magic to conjure larger meals, or to mend garments that Hagrid constantly outgrew. The love required to persist under such circumstances reveals a strength of character often overlooked when fans speak of Hagrid's family. Hagrid's fond recollection of being hoisted onto his father's shoulders is particularly touching. To any child, the act of riding on a parent's shoulders symbolizes safety, affection, and joy. For Hagrid, it must have meant even more. Considering his size, by the age of 10 he was already enormous compared to most adults, yet he still remembered the time when his father lifted him. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Hagrid tells Harry, "Me dad used to put me on his shoulders all the time. Tiny little bloke he was, too." The image of a man so small carrying a child destined to become a giant reminds us of the strange beauty of parental love. It is not logical, but it is powerful. Enough to make impossible things real. The absence of Fridwulfa cast a long shadow over Hagrid's life, but it also heightened the bond he shared with his father. Giants in Rowling's world are portrayed as aggressive, dangerous, and unable to integrate with wizarding society. Hagrid inherited their size and physical resilience, but none of their violent temperaments. This contrast suggests that his father's gentle influence shaped the man he became. Where Fridwulfer might have taught brutality, his father instead instilled kindness. Without that early care, it is easy to imagine Hagrid succumbing to bitterness or anger. Instead, he grew into the protector of magical creatures, the loyal friend, the man who welcomed Harry into the wizarding world. The story of his parentage also provides insight into Hagrid's later insecurities. When Rita Skeeter published her article in the Daily Prophet exposing his giant heritage, Hagrid retreated into shame and humiliation. He feared rejection from his students and friends, even though they had known him for years. This reaction shows how deeply the memory of his father mattered to him. His dad's death when Hagrid was still young left him vulnerable to prejudice. He clung to the simple truth that his father had loved him regardless of his unusual size. To lose that anchor meant carrying through life both pride in his father's memory and fear of society's judgment. The irony of Hagrid's relationship with his father is sharpened by the fact that he lost him so early. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Hagrid mentions that his father died when he was in his second year at Hogwarts. This left him utterly alone, except for the faint memories of warmth and belonging. Shortly afterward, he was expelled from school for an incident involving Aragog, which further deepened his sense of isolation. Yet even then, the echo of his father's affection never left him. He continued to speak about his dad with pride, recounting humorous details as if they were treasures kept alive through storytelling. One of the most fascinating aspects of this parentage is the symbolism it carries. Rowling uses Hagrid's father as a representation of ordinary goodness. He had no fame, no wealth, no grand destiny. He was simply a small wizard who loved his son. In contrast, Hagrid's mother came from a race renowned for size and strength, yet her legacy to him was absence. The moral contrast is striking. Greatness of heart often comes not from power, but from humility. Hagrid's entire life reflects this truth as he consistently puts loyalty and compassion above ambition. The dual heritage of Hagrid also explains his deep empathy for creatures that others fear. He often identifies with misunderstood beings, Aragog, Buckbeak, even dragons. Like them, Hagrid was judged for his size and bloodline rather than his character. His father's unconditional love taught him to see beyond appearances. When he insists that there's no such thing as a bad creature, only bad treatment, it echoes the lesson he must have internalized from a man who loved a child others might have abandoned. Looking closely at the details of his childhood, one realizes how the image of Hagrid carrying his father in his pocket, as he once joked, is more than a funny anecdote. It symbolizes the reversal of roles that love sometimes creates. A father might protect his child, but in Hagrid's case the child quickly outgrew the father's strength. Instead of erasing affection, this imbalance seems to have strengthened it. The memory that Hagrid treasured was not about size or power, but about intimacy and care. Hagrid's unusual background also contributes to the way other characters view him. Dumbledore, who always trusted Hagrid, quickly recognized the value of his upbringing. He knew that Hagrid had survived prejudice, abandonment, and the death of a parent, yet remained gentle. Dumbledore entrusted him with the most delicate of tasks, from guarding the Philosopher's Stone to guiding Harry into the wizarding world. Such trust was not misplaced, for Hagrid's loyalty was unshakable. Behind that loyalty lay the simple foundation his father gave him in childhood. Readers often focus on Harry's own orphanhood as the central tale of parental loss in the series, yet Hagrid's story mirrors it in a quieter way. Both characters lost parents early and carried the memory of love as their greatest inheritance. Harry remembers his mother's sacrifice. Hagrid remembers his father's kindness. These two forms of love, sacrifice and devotion become guiding lights for the characters who most often embody warmth in a world shadowed by darkness. It is worth remembering that when Harry first meets Hagrid, the half-giant acts almost like a father figure himself. He gives Harry his first birthday cake, introduces him to Diagon Alley, and tells him about his parents. Perhaps it was natural for Hagrid to fill this role because he was trying to give Harry what his own father gave him: acceptance, pride, and love without conditions. This parallel deepens our appreciation for the man who was more than just a gamekeeper. The truest legacy of Hagrid's father lies not in his size or his power, but in the humanity that he passed down. A tiny man raised a giant, and through patience and warmth created a son whose heart was greater than his strength. The next time we think of Hagrid's immense hands gently holding a baby dragon, or his enormous frame protecting Harry and his friends, we should recall that behind all of it stands the memory of a small father who once carried his son on his shoulders, defying logic but never defying love. Number 24, he always dreamed of finishing Hogwarts. Of all the characters in the Harry Potter universe, Rubeus Hagrid stands out not only for his size and gentle heart, but also for the quiet tragedy of a dream that was never fulfilled. Though readers often see him as the cheerful groundskeeper, the man who brews strong tea and raises dangerous creatures, beneath the surface lies a story of loss, longing, and an unshakable connection to Hogwarts. Hagrid's dismissal from the school in his third year was not merely the loss of a few academic lessons, it was the loss of an entire future, a stolen destiny that haunted him silently even as he smiled and offered Harry a birthday cake. When Tom Riddle accused Hagrid of opening the Chamber of Secrets, the expulsion was swift and merciless. His wand was broken, his name tarnished, and his chance at graduating vanished before he could defend himself properly. Although Dumbledore, then a Transfiguration professor, never believed in Hagrid's guilt, the decision stood. The boy who had once dreamed of completing his magical education was reduced to an outcast, condemned to a half-life on the fringes of the castle he adored. The bitterness of that injustice lingered in Hagrid's heart. He never wore the badge of a student again, but his spirit remained tied to Hogwarts in a way that few others could understand. Readers may remember the line in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets when Hagrid says, "Been expelled. Third year, they snapped me wand in half. But Dumbledore let me stay on as gamekeeper. Great man, Dumbledore." His words carried pride, but hidden inside them was a grief that was never healed. For Hagrid, remaining at Hogwarts as gamekeeper was more than gratitude. It was a way of clinging to the dream of being part of the magical world he was denied. Every creature he raised, every key he kept, every errand he ran was a fragment of the life of a wizard he once hoped to be. Hagrid's longing becomes most visible when he interacts with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. He delights in their stories of classes, marvels at their knowledge, and often asks about lessons he himself never had the chance to finish. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, he eagerly listens as Harry describes the Triwizard Tournament tasks, treating the boys' challenges as though they were his own. His interest was never idle curiosity. It was the yearning of someone who, in another life, should have sat beside them in those very classrooms taking notes, waving a wand, and writing essays he would have grumbled about, but still cherished. The emotional weight of this becomes stronger when one considers the fact that Hagrid never fully gave up on magic. Though his wand was broken, the fragments remained hidden inside the pink umbrella he carried everywhere. He used it clumsily, often unsuccessfully, but it symbolized his refusal to abandon the wizard he knew he was inside. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Hagrid tapped the bricks of the leaky cauldron wall with his umbrella to open Diagon Alley for Harry, he was not only guiding the boy into the magical world, but also momentarily stepping into the role of a wizard he might have been. That act of tapping bricks was a ritual he could have performed daily as a student, but instead it became a stolen glimpse of the life he lost. Hagrid's attachment to Hogwarts was never solely professional. He treated the castle like a home, the Forbidden Forest like an extension of his backyard, and the students like family. Each feast he attended in the Great Hall was a reminder of the dinners he never shared as a student. Each Quidditch match he cheered for was a substitute for the games he might have played or supported as a boy in Gryffindor colours. Though he never openly lamented these losses, his enthusiasm revealed his hidden grief. Hagrid's hearty laugh and clumsy kindness often masked the sorrow of a man who longed to belong more deeply than anyone realized. The bitterness of his expulsion returned when the Chamber of Secrets was opened again during Harry's second year. Hagrid was once more dragged away by the Ministry, unjustly accused of crimes he never committed. The echo of his first expulsion must have been overwhelming. Readers recall his words to Harry and Ron as he was being taken to Azkaban. If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. His attempt at bravery barely disguised the pain of reliving his worst memory. In that moment, it was not only the injustice of the present that crushed him, but the unbearable reminder that his boyhood dream had been destroyed by a similar accusation. Even after such humiliation, Hagrid never turned bitter against Hogwarts itself. Instead, he poured his heart into the only roles left to him. As Keeper of Keys and Grounds, he became the bridge between the magical world and the students, introducing them to both Hogwarts and the magical creatures that fascinated him. When Harry first set foot into the castle, it was Hagrid who had carried him across the lake, guiding him to the place that had also once stolen his heart. For Harry, that journey was an entrance into destiny. For Hagrid, it was a repetition of his own childhood, relived each year through new eyes. Hagrid's dream of finishing his education also explains his fierce loyalty to Dumbledore. It was Dumbledore who offered him a place after the expulsion, Dumbledore who trusted him when the rest of the school saw a monster. To Hagrid, the professor represented not only justice, but also the fragile hope that he was still part of the world he loved. When he repeatedly told Harry, "Never doubted Dumbledore for a second," it was not blind obedience. It was gratitude born from the fact that without Dumbledore, Hagrid would have lost everything, even his place at Hogwarts. That gratitude fueled his determination to serve, protect, and remain within the castle walls at any cost. The tragedy of Hagrid's lost education becomes sharper when one remembers how deeply he valued the achievements of others. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he beams with pride when Hermione helps him with Buckbeak's legal defense, clinging to her intellect as though it were his own triumph. For Hagrid, the students' success was not merely joy for their sake, it was the echo of the success he wished he had known. The parchment, quills, and exams he never completed weighed on him silently, while the victories of his young friends became a balm for his regret. Perhaps the most poignant sign of his longing was his constant teaching outside the classroom. Despite lacking official status, Hagrid could not resist becoming a mentor. From care of magical creatures to the small lessons about dragons and hippogriffs, he was always sharing knowledge, sometimes disastrously, but always with passion. His makeshift lessons were not only his way of giving to the students, but also of reliving what had been denied to him. Every time he stood before Harry, Ron, and Hermione with excitement in his voice, he was symbolically finishing the education that had been stolen. Hagrid's vulnerability about his expulsion also surfaces in his relationship with Madame Maxime. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when discussing their half-giant heritage, Hagrid's insecurity reveals itself. Just as he felt ashamed of being cast out of Hogwarts, he struggled with the idea of being different, of not fully belonging in the wizarding world. His exclusion from Hogwarts education had intertwined with his feelings about his giant blood, both symbols of an identity denied. That combination of personal pain and longing made Hagrid both tender and tragic, a man perpetually on the edge of the magical society he loved so dearly. The bond between Hagrid and Harry was built on more than friendship. Harry, too, had been denied a childhood of belonging, left outside the magical world until his letter arrived. When Hagrid handed him that envelope in a stormy hut on the rock, it was not just the start of Harry's journey, it was Hagrid silently giving someone else what he had lost, a full chance to be a student of Hogwarts. In watching Harry grow, Hagrid lived vicariously through him, seeing in the boy the life he himself should have had. This quiet truth about Hagrid transforms the way one views his role in the series. He was not simply the cheerful, bumbling caretaker with a heart of gold. He was a man scarred by injustice, carrying the wound of an unfinished education, who stayed close to Hogwarts because he could not bear to let go. Every smile, every feast, every lecture about dragons was infused with the longing of a man who never stopped dreaming of being a student once more. His story reminds readers that Hogwarts is not only a place of spells and exams, but also a symbol of belonging. And for Hagrid, it was the dream that never died, even when the doors had closed on him forever. Number 25. His cooking was more dangerous than a troll. Hagrid's reputation among the students of Hogwarts was built on his kindness, his loyalty to Dumbledore, and his fascination with dangerous creatures. Yet hidden within this image was another trait, one that Rowling often slipped into the narrative, not with menace, but with humour: his cooking. It is easy to laugh at the recurring jokes about rock-hard cakes or tooth-breaking fudge, but beneath the comedy lies a telling layer of characterization. The man who could tame a three-headed dog or keep a blast-ended scroot in his hut was utterly incapable of producing food safe for human consumption. It is this detail that makes him feel real, not an untouchable giant, but a person with flaws that could be just as hazardous as the beasts he loved. The most famous example appears in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Harry and Ron visit Hagrid for tea. Rowling describes the rock cakes set before them as objects that threatened their teeth rather than pleased their stomachs. The passage reads, Hagrid poured them some tea from a brown teapot and offered them rock cakes which were so hard they almost broke their teeth, but Harry and Ron pretended to be enjoying them. This moment, played for laughs, tells the reader several things at once. Hagrid is eager to be hospitable, to share what he has. Yet at the same time he is blind to the reality that his food is inedible. His desire to nurture others comes through, but so does his clumsiness, making his hospitality more dangerous than the giant spider Aragog ever was. One must remember that Rowling never wasted details. When she writes about Hagrid's failed cooking, she is not merely slipping in comic relief, she is building the portrait of a man who is simultaneously nurturing and reckless. Food in the wizarding world often carried symbolic meaning. The Great Hall, feasts conjured by house elves, showed abundance and safety. Mrs. Weasley's cooking symbolized love and family. By contrast, Hagrid's meals symbolized a distorted version of care. He wanted to nourish, but his results could cause harm. In a world where symbolism matters, his burnt sausages and granite-like cakes were an extension of his personality, full of warmth but lacking precision. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Hagrid cooked sausages over the fire for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the smell of smoke and the charred surface hinted at something beyond mere clumsiness. He was not simply a bad cook, he lacked the discipline to approach everyday life with the same caution he reserved for his beasts. He would measure dragon feed or polish a hippogriff's feathers with careful dedication, yet when it came to food, he seemed unconcerned about danger. Rowling subtly emphasized this paradox. Hagrid could manage a herd of thestrals, but he could not serve a plate of breakfast without risking indigestion. The animals themselves reinforced the absurdity of his cooking. Fang, his large but cowardly boarhound, often served as a mirror to Hagrid's lifestyle. When even Fang refused certain offerings, the comedy sharpened into something darker. Readers may recall that in Prisoner of Azkaban, Fang whimpered and hid at the sound of thunder, yet this same dog would occasionally turn his nose away from Hagrid's food. Rowling used this to suggest that the culinary disasters were so extreme they intimidated even a creature who shared his hut and endured his chaos daily. If Fang, who lived comfortably among fire-breathing creatures and the pungent smell of ferret cages, drew the line at Hagrid's biscuits, then truly something was wrong. These moments may appear trivial, but they build tension through humour. Consider the scene in Chamber of Secrets where Harry and Ron, visiting Hagrid once again, were served rock cakes that could have been used as weapons. The metaphorical weight here is striking. The hospitality becomes threatening. Rowling is showing the reader that good intentions are not always safe. The boys swallow the cakes to avoid offending their host, and in that moment we see the entire relationship between students and Hagrid captured in a single act: loyalty, affection, and a willingness to endure pain for his sake. The comic food becomes a metaphor for his role in their lives, warm-hearted but dangerous. It is also worth noting that Hagrid's kitchen incompetence contrasts with his role as keeper of keys and grounds. His job required practical skills, but cooking did not fall among them. This absence may be Rowling's way of reminding readers that he was half giant, straddling the line between two worlds. Giants in the wizarding lore were not known for domestic talents. Their culture, as described in Order of the Phoenix, was violent and primal, far removed from the nurturing atmosphere of a kitchen. Hagrid's failure to cook might then be interpreted as part of his heritage. His strength and size allowed him to wrestle with trolls, but his hands were too heavy for delicate tasks like measuring flour or controlling oven temperature. What deepens the irony is how Rowling pairs his cooking with moments of emotional vulnerability. When he makes tea for Harry in Philosopher's Stone, he is also confessing his regret for revealing information about the stone to a stranger in the pub. His bad cooking always accompanies emotional honesty. He cannot lie, cannot conceal his feelings, and cannot hide the disasters that come out of his oven. This alignment between emotional transparency and culinary failure makes him more endearing. The very food that could harm his guests becomes a symbol of trust. By eating it, Harry and his friends show they accept him as he is. The humour of Hagrid's food also exposes a darker underside of Hogwarts life. The school was full of dangers, curses, beasts, the forbidden forest, but one of the hazards came not from magic but from ordinary domestic hospitality. It reminds readers that danger does not always arrive in grand forms. Sometimes it is disguised as a plate of biscuits at a friend's table. In Half-Blood Prince, this theme returns when Ron is nearly poisoned by a drink meant for Dumbledore. Rowling repeatedly tied food to peril, whether through Hagrid's innocent incompetence or darker plots. In this context, his cooking feels less like a joke and more like foreshadowing of how even the most ordinary sustenance could become a weapon. Hagrid's food also shapes how characters interact with him. Hermione, always practical, often displayed polite restraint around his offerings. Ron, with his bottomless appetite, was the most willing to take risks, though even he grimaced at the density of the rock cakes. Their responses highlight their personalities. Harry, in contrast, always made the effort to eat, showing his empathy. Rowling used these reactions to draw distinctions between the trio, while simultaneously reinforcing their bond with Hagrid. Their willingness to choke down indigestible food was an act of loyalty, reflecting how far they would go to protect his feelings. When analysing Hagrid's role, one must see that his cooking is not a throwaway gag. It is part of the tapestry that defines his humanity. Dumbledore's world was populated with figures of immense skill and power, Snape with potions, McGonagall with transfiguration, Hermione with her brilliance. Hagrid provided the counterweight. He was strong but clumsy, loving but incompetent. His food dramatized this contradiction. A man who could carry Harry as a baby out of the ruins of Godric's Hollow could not manage to bake bread fit for human mouths. This contrast grounded the story, preventing it from drowning in perfection. Even the descriptions Rowling chose carry weight. The word rock in rock cake is repeated so often that it becomes part of his identity. Rocks are natural, unrefined, and immovable, qualities that reflect Hagrid himself. He is steadfast, stubborn, and tied to the natural world. The cakes are not only culinary disasters, but linguistic symbols of his essence. In biting down on one, Harry is metaphorically tasting Hagrid himself, unyielding, raw, and enduring. One cannot forget that Rowling herself admitted in interviews that she enjoyed writing Hagrid's comic weaknesses. She wanted readers to see that heroes are not flawless. The wizarding world was filled with figures who failed in serious ways: betrayal, cruelty, corruption. Hagrid's failure was different. It was harmless in intent, but dangerous in practice. His food could chip a tooth, but it could not corrupt the soul. That difference matters. It is why readers forgive him instantly, why his clumsy offerings become affectionate memories rather than tragic scars. In the end, Hagrid's food represents something larger, the idea that love can exist alongside imperfection. He could not cook, but he wanted to give. His dangerous meals became symbols of his generosity. Rowling turned a flaw into a strength by making it a bridge between him and Harry. The boy who grew up hungry in a cupboard under the stairs found in Hagrid not only friendship and protection, but also the first offers of food, however questionable. The symbolic nourishment mattered more than the taste. The danger of the rock cakes was real, but the comfort of being served them was greater. In this paradox lies the essence of Hagrid's character, a man whose heart was always larger than his skills. Number 26. He owned a secret library on magical creatures. Hagrid was never the sort of man anyone imagined bent over a desk studying parchment by candlelight. His image was always that of a towering figure with tangled hair, muddy boots, and the faint smell of smoke and forest earth clinging to him. Yet hidden beneath the rough exterior was a collector's passion few at Hogwarts ever discovered. Behind the stacks of pumpkins and cages near his hut, he possessed something akin to a secret library, a private collection of books about magical creatures so peculiar and so dangerous that even some professors would have raised their eyebrows. In this treasure trove lay the real reason Hagrid could recite details about dragons, giants, and hippogriffs with such authority despite his lack of formal education. Hagrid's fascination with monsters was born long before he was expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year. After Aragog was released into the Forbidden Forest and Hagrid's wand was broken, one might expect him to retreat in shame. Instead, his thirst for knowledge about the creatures of the magical world only deepened. He no longer had access to the Hogwarts library, with its carefully guarded, restricted section, but Hagrid found other ways to acquire texts. From second-hand shops in Knockturn Alley to forgotten trunks at the back of wizarding households, he quietly gathered volumes that described in vivid detail the very beings he loved. Some were ancient folios with cracked spines, others modern pamphlets printed in hurried runs, but all were united by one theme: monsters, misunderstood and marvelous. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the reader is reminded of Hagrid's curious book-collecting habits when Harry notices volumes scattered across the hut, many of them marked with dangerous titles. Rowling writes, Hagrid had a stack of books on his table, including Men Who Loved Dragons Too Much and Dragon Breeding for Pleasure and Profit. The casual mention is easily overlooked, but it provides a glimpse into his hidden archive. These were not isolated purchases. Over time, he amassed a library that was both impressive and alarming, a true compendium of magical zoology beyond the official Hogwarts syllabus. One of the most striking examples of his library's peculiar contents was his copy of the Monster Book of Monsters. While it was the assigned textbook for care of magical creatures during Harry's 3rd year, Hagrid had owned a battered edition long before it was ever distributed to students. His copy bore teeth marks in its binding and frayed straps from years of wrestling it into submission. Unlike the students who panicked at the sight of the chomping book, Hagrid laughed it off, stroking the spine until the beast calmed down. He knew these volumes were not just instructional, they were challenges, puzzles to be solved by patience and empathy. His secret library demanded not only reading but taming. Some of the titles in his collection were nearly forbidden. It was whispered that Hagrid once possessed a fragment of the Dark Creatures Compendium, a text long banned by the Ministry of Magic for its graphic detail about breeding practices of werewolves and trolls. Whether this was rumour or truth, the idea reflected the reckless bravery that defined him. After all, Hagrid never flinched at subjects others considered grotesque. To him, even the vilest beast had dignity, and every scrap of knowledge was worth preserving. It explained how he could nurse Norbert the Norwegian ridgeback hatchling with milk laced with brandy, while most wizards would have fled in terror. The very presence of these volumes in his hut added layers to the story of Hagrid's friendship with Harry. When Harry first encountered the three-headed dog, Fluffy, Hagrid casually admitted that he had bought the creature from a Greek chappie in the pub. Such nonchalance was possible only because Hagrid had read extensively about multi-headed guard beasts. His books provided the technical knowledge needed to house Fluffy safely, to sedate him with music, and even to feed him properly. Without his library, Hagrid's risks might have ended in catastrophe far sooner. Instead, he operated with a confidence that came not from classroom instruction, but from years of private, secret study. The same was true of Buckbeak, the proud hippogriff who played such a central role in The Prisoner of Azkaban. When Hagrid guided the students through the ritual of bowing before the creature, his words carried the weight of someone who had read countless accounts of hippogriff etiquette. The bow was no simple courtesy. It was a tradition recorded in manuscripts that warned of the dangers of disrespect. Harry's survival in that lesson was owed as much to Hagrid's patient instruction as to the volumes stacked in his hut. Behind every command Hagrid gave, there was a line once studied in a dusty tome. It is easy to overlook how vital this secret library was to the broader narrative. Hagrid's knowledge often determined whether encounters with magical beasts ended in disaster or wonder. In the Philosopher's Stone, he guided Harry through the forest to meet a centaur, never losing his calm even when danger loomed. In the Chamber of Secrets, he spoke of acromantulas with precision, knowing their habits and hierarchies well enough to navigate their lair. These moments were not strokes of luck. They were the fruits of long nights spent poring over pages that most wizards would not touch without gloves. What makes this collection even more remarkable is how it reflected Hagrid's resilience. Expelled from Hogwarts, stripped of his wand, and branded by many as dangerous, he nonetheless pursued knowledge with a stubbornness that rivaled Hermione's. But unlike Hermione's organized research, Hagrid's learning was patchwork, built from scraps, fragments, and smuggled texts. His hut became both sanctuary and library, a place where the margins of wizarding knowledge lived on. In this sense, Hagrid's library was an act of quiet rebellion against the system that had denied him formal education. The Ministry of Magic might have frowned on such a collection. After all, books about dragon breeding had been classified as restricted since the Warlocks' Convention of 1709. Hagrid, however, was never concerned with legality. He valued the creatures too deeply to let bureaucracy dictate his learning. He once declared, "I don't see what's wrong with it, to be honest. That's how it's supposed to be." His words echoed not just about beasts, but about the books themselves. Knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, was not something to fear, but something to approach with respect. There is also the matter of influence. Harry, Ron, and Hermione often benefited from the hidden wisdom that flowed from those books. When Hermione questioned Hagrid about dragons in their first year, his quick reference to dragon breeding for pleasure and profit revealed a mind steeped in obscure detail. This, in turn, allowed the trio to plan for Norbert's smuggling to Charlie Weasley in Romania. Without Hagrid's careless mention of the book, the plot might have unfolded quite differently. His secret library did not stay hidden. It spilled into the adventures of the young heroes again and again. The emotional core of this hidden library lies in its reflection of Hagrid's heart. Every book on his shelves was a love letter to creatures deemed unworthy of compassion. Where others saw only monsters, Hagrid saw stories, traditions, and families. His books gave him the words to defend them, to explain that giants were not inherently violent, that dragons were majestic, and that even acromantulas had their place in the natural order. Knowledge made him an advocate, not just a caretaker. Without these texts, Hagrid might have been dismissed as a foolhardy gamekeeper. With them, he became a bridge between the human world and the magical wilderness,